A good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is really great to see this packed house for tonight's introductions and discussion. This discussion on whether there's a way out in the Israel-Palestine situation. My name is Marcel Brus. I'm Professor of Public International Law here at this university, and it is my privilege to be the moderator tonight. I hope that we have a very good discussion. We will start today with 2 introductions, and then there will be, we hope, at least 3/4 of an hour for discussion. Let me first say Israel-Palestine. People who attend my lectures is that it is a recurrent theme in the lectures. If you talk about international law, if you talk about international politics, it's very difficult to get around that problem in the Middle East. Some people get tired of it, but should we get tired of it, or should we just continue to try to find a solution for that problem, which is now, if we start with the early part of the previous century, it's a long time ago that the whole around the First World War, perhaps even earlier, that the problem started to erupt, and now we still have no idea how to solve it. It keeps us busy every day. Also in the Netherlands, if we look at the news last week about whether or not the Netherlands should recognize the state of Palestine, just like Sweden did, and like 130 odd countries did in the world. Of course, we didn't do so yet. There's a lot of, in the European Union, in Brussels, lots of things are going on. And there also the voices are stronger to say we have to act against the clearly illegal settlements in the West Bank. All kind of things which, and we see of course every day in the news, we saw it in the recent months also, these, I would say, desperate attacks from individuals who, individual Palestinians in this case, who attack Israelis randomly. With what purpose? What could that change the situation? I think that shows some desperation at the side of the people who undertake such attacks. When I talked about the Netherlands, I said the Netherlands says we do not want to recognize Palestine yet, because that would interfere with the peace process. But which peace process? Is there a peace process? Is there still a basis that we can strive for a state, a 2-state solution, which is usually proclaimed that should be the outcome of the peace process? Is that still possible? Is there a viable long-term future for a state of Israel? Is there a viable long-term state future for the state of Palestine? Is the 2-state solution still possible? We will not get an answer on that tonight, but we will get some views on how to deal with this situation. How could we make progress in the Middle East in solving this problem? We have 2 people from Israel to speak about their critical views on what Israel does. Very critical views, probably. And we'll have next week people from Palestine, or people representing more the Palestinian side. Is there a viable Palestinian state possible within the confines of, let's say, the 1967 borders? Tonight, and before I announce the speakers, I would like to say this meeting is being recorded, audio, video. So those people who know, I just want to inform you that that is the case. So if you don't want to be on video with questions or whatever, you cannot prevent it. You will have to raise your question then after the meeting in private. But I'll just would like to know you that it is video recorded. We have tonight 2 speakers from Israel, both born in Israel. Both have been conscientious objector. In order in Israel you have to be drafted to go into military services. They objected to that already at a young age. They were critical about that, the Israeli army. They all both became very active. Ronnie Barkan is the first speaker tonight. He's already very long time an active campaigner for the boycott from within campaign, amongst others probably also in other aspects you've been active. And that is also linked very much to the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign, which is also undertaken. He will, I'm quite sure, tell you much more about that. I'm not going to introduce that very much more. He is very much inspired also by the struggle in South Africa, the anti-apartheid struggle in the past. And of course, we know that there's now more and more parallels being made between apartheid in South Africa and the situation in Israel and the occupied territories. The second speaker is Lior. He is also activist and campaigner. He is born in Israel, as I said. He did his bachelor studies in Israel, then went out to Europe, to various places, which I already forgot. I think one is in Sweden, was it? Yes, and the other one was? Here, yes. Yeah. And then you did your master's, and now he is in Amsterdam doing, just started a PhD research, and also the topic of the PhD research is linked to the problem in Israel and Palestine. Which way forward? That's the question we all have to deal with. And let's hear what the voices from Israel have to say about what way forward. Thank you. Give a big applause for Ronnie Barkan.
Okay. So I can use this. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to the university for hosting us. My name is Ronnie. I'm a conscientious objector to military service, as was mentioned, an Israeli dissident. I'm also an active member of the Palestinian popular struggle, which is struggling against Palestinian popular struggle, and most importantly, a member of the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign with a small Israeli group called Boycott from Within. But I also have another way to introduce myself, and that is to simply say that I'm a privileged Israeli Jew. More precisely, I'm a much privileged white male Israeli Jew. Now, this is not because I chose to be like that, but this is the situation I was born into. I carry an Israeli citizenship, but my nationality, on the other hand, is Jewish. So my legal status in the state of Israel is a privileged Israeli Jew. Israel is probably the only country in the world that does not recognize its own nationality. There is no such thing as Israeli nationality. So I carry a Jewish nationality. My neighbor in Jaffa, they will have, for example, an Arab nationality. So when I came here to Europe, I was carrying with me my Israeli passport. My Israeli passport, interestingly enough, says that my nationality is Israeli, but that is a lie. There is no such thing as Israeli nationality. Now, this was taken to the Supreme Court in Israel because there was a group of Israeli Jews who said, we don't feel Jewish, we feel Israeli, we want to be acknowledged as such. So they appealed to the Supreme Court in Israel. After much deliberation, the Supreme Court in Israel, which is the main vehicle of apartheid, decided that they cannot acknowledge having Israeli nationality, and they said that doing that will undermine the very character of the State of Israel. That is a very true statement. Having an Israeli nationality in Israel would mean that at least on paper there will be some basis for equality, let alone having a constitution which will actually safeguard some rights for everyone. But that goes against everything that the State of Israel is about. So we can go to the map maybe. I will try finding it. Here. I don't know how much each of you know about, how much each of you know about Israel-Palestine. So let's give a quick historical introduction. The State of Israel was founded in 1948 on the basis of ethnic cleansing and ethnic segregation. A little before that, on November 29th, there was the UN partition plan, November 29th, which is what you see here above me. Just a few days ago, we marked the partition plan that was accepted by the UN. That partition plan decided to give the white area to that state that was supposed to be the Jewish state, the Israeli state. That white area was supposed to be given to the people who occupied that white area there. They only occupied about 10% of the land, and they were only about 30% of the population. So this partition plan, already from the get-go, was very unfair. Most of the people who arrived in Palestine, historic Palestine, in order to form the Israeli state, the Jewish state, were newcomers to the land. There were also those who were living there for generations, but most of them were newcomers to the land. And they didn't even constitute the majority of the land, of the population there, but they were given more than half of the land. That was very unfair. But that is not the main Palestinian tragedy. Actually, that plan never came into fruition, because the first thing that the Israelis did when they founded that, what they call a Jewish and democratic state, the first thing that they did was to expel the indigenous people from their land in order to create a Jewish majority. So Israel was founded on the basis of ethnic cleansing. It was founded on the basis of taking the land without the people. And this is actually how it was founded. Not this, but this. In that plan, in the UN partition plan, actually, Israel was obligated to respect the rights of all the people who were living there. Also in the previous decision, in the Balfour Declaration, the same thing. Israel was obligated to maintain the rights of all the people of that land. But this is not what happened. What happened, in fact, is that about 530 villages, Palestinian villages, have been demolished or reoccupied, and over 700,000 people have been expelled. The land basically became having a Jewish majority, an artificially created Jewish majority. And ever since, to this day, that is what we are dealing with. We are dealing with the fact that Israel would like to maintain this artificially created Jewish majority at any cost. So the first thing they did after they expelled the people of the land is to legislate, to build the whole legal system that will maintain the situation, that will discriminate in every possible way against those indigenous people of the land, those who have been expelled, to deny them the right to come back home, and those who have not been expelled, because not all of them have been expelled from there, to deny them basic rights. So the legal foundation of the State of Israel is what we refer to as a legal foundation that actually falls under the definition of the crime of apartheid. It is inherently, systematically discriminating between people according to their ethnicity. That is why I carry a Jewish nationality. This is the way for the state to discriminate between the Jews and the non-Jews. So Israel recognizes 4 different nationalities inside its territory for its own population. None of them are Israeli, as I mentioned. There's Jewish, Arab, Druze, and Circassian, some minorities, none of which are nationalities, by the way. Now, the Minister of Interior recognizes over 130 different nationalities, like Dutch and so on, but it does not recognize its own nationality. Another thing that Israel doesn't recognize is its own borders. What happened is that the state was founded on that basis that I mentioned. About 20 years later, also the green areas have been militarily occupied. Ever since, we have the longest running military occupation in modern time, which is also a very harsh and brutal one. And these people under military occupation, the West Bank on the right and East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip on the left, live under military rule, under very harsh conditions, especially the people in Gaza. I'm sure you have heard of the recent massacre that took place in Gaza. And also that is being the land and the resources are being taken away all the time. Again, with the same logic of taking away as much land with as little people as possible. People, for example, living in East Jerusalem, which are in a specific situation, they are not under military occupation, they are what's regarded as Israeli residents. They're not citizens, they're residents, but they have a very precarious situation. So even though they have been living in East Jerusalem for generations, those who leave their place of residency, for example, in order to come and study here in Groningen, or those who marry and choose to live in Ramallah, for example, and have stayed there for a couple of years, can lose the right to ever go back home to Jerusalem. So the situation is a little precarious for them. And this is what we are dealing with. So I mentioned that I'm a conscientious objector. I refuse to serve in the Israeli army. The Israeli army, there's a mandatory service in Israel, 3 years for men, 2 years for women. But actually we are being brought to be soldiers from kindergarten, literally from kindergarten. So the whole educational system is part of this system of indoctrination. And in order to overcome that, in order to decide to become a conscientious objector is quite a difficult process because you have to go against everything the society tells you. In my case, actually, I decided I was not brave enough, mature enough, I didn't know enough when the time came for me to get drafted. So I did get into the system and then immediately decided to get exempted, to get out. It took me in total 1.5 years to get exempted from the army. And during that 1.5 years, I was trying my best. I was not willing to take part, but I was trying to get out of the system. Lior will tell his story. He's also a conscientious objector. We also have another conscientious objector here. And they were actually, I think, much more adamant, much more fighting the system, in a way. Another thing that I mentioned is the Palestinian popular struggle. I mentioned that there is a harsh military occupation, the longest running military occupation. But those people who are living under the harshest conditions, they choose to stand up for their rights. And for that, they are being repressed even more. But they're also being joined by a handful of Israelis and internationals who come in solidarity. And usually there are weekly demonstrations where we go to demonstrate, usually against the annexation wall that cuts through the West Bank, takes away as much land as possible, as I mentioned, and so on. And we demonstrate against that. And these non-violent demonstrations are being met by sheer force, by a lot of force. And actually, they're even trying weapons on us, what's called less than lethal weapons, which sometimes can be very lethal. So we're being met by violence from the Israeli army. But if a Palestinian and myself would go to demonstrate in the same demonstration, holding the same signs, chanting the same slogans, and we will get arrested, the consequences would be very different. Because under the military occupation, there are 2 sets of laws that govern. One is for the Palestinians under military rule, the other is and a civilian law for all the others. So if we both get arrested, he will be going to a military court. First of all, he will be held for much longer in custody, being detained for much longer. Then he will arrive at a military court, seeing a military judge. And the conviction rate in military courts in Israel is 99.7%. So for a Palestinian not to be convicted in military court would be a miracle. And actually, you could get convicted even for just standing with a loudspeaker. That would already be an offense under military rule. On the other hand, I will go to see a civilian judge in a civilian court, and the consequences would be very different. One example of many is that a Palestinian colleague and myself were arrested in the village of Bilin, doing the same thing at the same time. While I spent 2 nights in jail, he spent 1.5 years for doing the same things. So I mentioned being conscientious objector, being part of the Palestinian popular struggle. But most importantly for me is to mention the BDS campaign. In July 2004, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, had to decide about the legality of the wall that is cutting through the West Bank. In order to decide about the wall, they also had to decide about the legality of the settlements, the Jewish-only settlements that are there. They had to decide about whose land is this, and obviously about the wall. So the verdict was quite clear. They said that the whole of the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem are occupied Palestinian territories. Every single Israeli settlement there is illegal and has to be dismantled. And every kilometer of the wall has to be dismantled because it is illegal. International law is very clear, definitely about the occupied territories. Because the situation is clear. Israel has exactly and precisely zero rights over the occupied territories. Just like the US has exactly zero rights over Iraq. So, international law is very clear. 1 year later, in July 2005, Palestinian civil society and a large representation of Palestinian civil society came out with a call for BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. In the call, it states that Israel is obligated under international law to respect certain rights of the Palestinians. There are 3 fundamental rights for the Palestinians. And until such a time that Israel respects these rights, then nonviolent means of boycott, divestment, and sanctions have to be applied on the criminal apartheid state. What are these rights? First, clearly, ending of the military occupation. People have the right to be free from such an occupation. Secondly, equality for those who are Israeli citizens, Palestinian citizens of Israel, sometimes called Israeli Arabs. And as I mentioned, the whole legal system is such that it discriminates against them. The early laws, there are 3 laws that are explicitly racist, that clearly state that if you are Jewish nationality, not Jewish by religion, Israel has nothing to do with religion, it has everything to do with ethnic supremacy. So there are 3 laws that state that if you have a Jewish nationality, then you get certain privileges, certain rights. And then there are many other laws that build upon these laws. So in total, we have over 50 laws today that are clearly discriminatory against the citizens of Israel, those who are not Jewish, the others. So those people, 20% of the population, have the right for equality inside Israel. And third, and most important, is the right of the refugees. The ones who have been expelled from their land during the foundation of the State of Israel, and ever since are denied the right to come back home. They are today the majority of Palestinians. They are about 70% of all Palestinians. So if we do not deal with these 3 fundamental rights, and especially with the right of return, with the right of the refugees, we have not really dealt with the Palestinian-Israeli issue, or the Zionist-Palestinian issue. We can deal with aspects of it. We can resolve the occupation of 67, which is this. But what about that? And this is what we are struggling for. We're struggling for these 3 fundamental rights, which are protected by international law and UN resolutions and so on. And until such a time is met, when these rights are being implemented, then we're calling on you to apply pressure in order to bring about a change, in order to make Israel abide by its obligations under international law. This is all we're calling for. We're saying that Israel is not above the law, and it should be treated just like any other state, no more, no less. At the moment, the situation is very different. At the moment, Israel gets free rein to do whatever it wants. It receives full support from the US, we all know that, militarily, diplomatically, financially. Even support that goes against stated US foreign policy. So when there was some vote, for example, in the UN against the Israeli settlements in the West Bank, and then the US used its veto power to veto that vote, even though its stated foreign policy is clearly against these settlements. So this is what the US does, and there is no question that the US backs Israel 100%. Unfortunately, also the EU backs Israel to the fullest. Every member state of the EU, for example, is violating not only international law, but also violating its own laws by carrying on with business as usual with Israel. Because under the trade agreement between the EU and Israel, what is called the EU-Israel Association Agreement, there is a binding clause, Article 2 of the agreement, which states clearly that if there is a consistent human rights violation in Israel-Palestine, and there is, then the whole agreement cannot be carried on. Some corrective measures can be taken by the EU. They can freeze the agreement, that's one thing. They can sanction, they can take other corrective measures. What they cannot do, legally, is to carry on with business as usual with Israel. What they choose to do, however, is to close their eyes, to violate not only international law, but also to violate their own laws that they have, in their own paper that they have signed on, in order to protect Israel. So what we're saying is that Israel should be treated just like any other state. That will be enough to bring about a huge change. Now, we know that because it is happening, actually. Not because of the politicians that I mentioned, but because of people like you and me, who have had enough of their politicians and are starting to speak up. The BDS campaign started in July 2005. Since then, it became a global awareness movement, taking inspiration from the struggle that took place against the former case of apartheid in South Africa. This is becoming more and more vocal, more and more people are joining by the day. And you could say that for 60 years, nothing has been changing in Israel-Palestine, and for the past decade, everything is changing, pretty much since the BDS campaign started. We hear, the whole discourse is changing, actually. 10 years ago, you would still discuss Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East, even though it's not a democracy and never was one, not even to begin with. It was founded on values that are the exact opposite of democratic values. It was founded on the basis of inequality, supremacy, disrespect of the minorities. This is the very foundation of the state of Israel. This is what we are fighting against. So, 10 years ago, you would still discuss Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East. Then they started talking about it as a flawed democracy, democracy minus. And today, more and more people are discussing Israel as what it is, which is a criminal apartheid state. Even at the White House, we heard that John Kerry recently, behind closed doors, questioned whether Israel is an apartheid state. So US policy is very clear in support of Israel, but even behind closed doors, they start speaking about Israel in a different tone. So this is very encouraging. Also recently, another example, and there's many such examples, the head of the Mossad, whatever you want to call it, there's no words to describe such an organization, the Israeli dark organization for intelligence and murder. He stated that they are concerned about the BDS campaign. For whatever reasons he has, this is very interesting, that it comes from those people at the top. And definitely what we are hearing is from Israeli society how this affects everything that's happening in Israel. BDS is right in the election campaign. For example, Tzipi Livni, which is for some reason regarded as center-left, even though she orchestrated the massacre of Gaza in 2008, 2009. Tzipi Livni, in her election campaign, she said, if you elect me, you will get political agreement. If you elect the others, Netanyahu, you will get international boycott. She was right. Because Netanyahu, unlike Livni, speaks a different language. This is why Livni is regarded as center-left, not because she thinks differently, but because she speaks differently. Netanyahu is not so much concerned about you guys, about what you people think about him. He's concerned about other things. He speaks a different language. The right wing in Israel, they are racist, and they're proud of it. They say, yes, there was an ethnic cleansing, and that's a good thing. The problem is that we didn't finish the job, that there are still some Palestinians left in Palestine. That's what the right wing says, all of them. At least they're honest. The left wing, the so-called left wing in Israel, because there is no left and never was, ever. There is no peace camp in Israel, I'm sorry to tell you. Never was. There are a handful of dissidents. The left wing, or the so-called left wing in Israel, they speak a different language. They use the language of human rights and peace in order to cover up their supremacy, in order to cover up the fact that they really like this situation, wherever it is, where they have this ultra-Jewish ethnically pure state for themselves on account of the indigenous people of the land. And for them, the only problem is this area here that doesn't look good to the cameras. So we have to solve the occupation of 67, but we shouldn't say a single word about the occupation of 48 or the ethnic cleansing of 48. They speak a different language, and they have brought this language of lies into an art form. They are discussing the strong basis of Israeli democracy, fighting for democracy, and so on. Even recently there was a Palestinian member of Knesset was kicked out of the podium because he called the deputy speaker, he called him a fascist, which is factually true, I suppose. And he was kicked out of the podium, and then there was a big mess, and then some liberal Zionist member of Knesset, he talked about that we are losing our democracy, and we're fighting for democracy. And he was very passionate about it. He really believes this, because what you see today was there all along, but it was sort of dormant. People were not that expressive about their racism. Now the racism is out in the open. You have the right-wing government. The racism is out in the open. So now you see, what you see is what you get. And now these liberal Zionists are reacting, and they're saying, we're fighting for democracy. We have to do something about it. We are losing Israel. They're not losing Israel. They're losing credibility. We are exposing Israel for what it is. The BDS campaign is not about removing one state or another. Actually, we don't even take a position about how many states, 1 state, 2 states, 5 states. Instead of having a solution-based approach, we have a rights-based approach. In any type of political solution that will eventually come about, we demand that the 3 fundamental rights of the Palestinians will be met. Ending of the occupation of 67, equality inside 48, and the right of the refugees. How is that going to be implemented? In what format? That is secondary. And that turns everything on its head, basically. Because when we discuss these 3 rights as one element that we fight for, and when you have over 170 different Palestinian civil society organizations that are signed on this call, trade unions, women organizations, student organizations, and so on, and they all agree on this. You could say that Palestinians are fragmented and they cannot agree on anything, but they can agree on this. This is probably the most representative of Palestinian society, this BDS call, which states that there are 3 fundamental rights and we have to demand these rights. This goes very much against the discourse that we are used to hearing about 2 states, we are losing the 2 states, we have, and all kinds of issues about that. Also, the question of recognizing Palestinian state is a little tricky, and we can talk about it later in the Q&A. I don't want to take up too much time. When we recognize a Palestinian state, or when we recognize anything for the future of Israel-Palestine, we have to demand the rights of everyone. And this is the main message for you today, that what we have to demand is equality, freedom, and justice for all the people of the land. And until such a time when there will be, and there will be at some point, equality, freedom, and justice for all the people of that land, then this is just tweaking. We're just playing with this issue, but we're not dealing with the heart of the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. Lior?
Yep.
Without further comments, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you. Okay. Can you hear me? Is it working? Yeah, I think it's excellent. Okay, brilliant. So my name is Lior. As my previous colleagues here mentioned, I'm also an Israeli, born in Tel Aviv. I lived most of my life in Israel, and I'm also a conscious objector. So when I reached the age of 18, similarly to Ronnie, I also decided to refuse military service. I did so, however, together with 250 other young Israelis, which together formed the High School Refusers Network. And together we made a stand saying, we will not serve in the Israeli army. In this case, it's 3 years military service for guys and 2 years military service for girls. We said we will not do so because of the Israeli policies in the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, this decision very much formed a big part of my political life. Basically, in Israel today, or for the past 60 years for that matter, if you say you're not willing to go and serve in the Israeli army, it automatically tags you as a traitor for the Israeli cause, as an outsider, as someone who did something wrong and deserves to be punished for it. And indeed, many of my friends have been punished very severely. Some spent 2 months in military prison, others spent 2 years in military prison, and I and a few other ones were very, very lucky to be exempted for military service. But of course, the army said, the problem is not us, the problem is you. Ever since I've been active for freedom and justice in Israel, Palestine, I did so both in Israel, also in demonstrations and protests against the Israeli policies, as well as in Europe, in capacity in several different campaigns. Now, what I want to do today is I want to talk with you about several topics, the first of which will be about Gaza. The second will be about Jerusalem, which is my area of research. And the third will be about the Israeli society, the way I see the Israeli society and the way I think the Israeli society plays a role in the conflict in Israel-Palestine and how it can play a different role in the future. So first, perhaps I will talk about Gaza. So Gaza is a very small strip of land. All right? It's a very small strip of land. Wait. There is a... Yeah. It's a very small strip of land. And what you know is Gaza came into existence in 1948. Now, what you might not know is that over 50% of the inhabitants of Gaza are themselves refugees. That is, they live in cramped refugee camps in the Gaza Strip, which has the highest population of any territory on the planet Earth per kilometer. All right? Now imagine that. You live in this cramped refugee camp, and then when in the international media, of course, they talk about the rocket attacks, those small shells that Palestinian militants are shooting towards Israel, those same shells, which unfortunately and very regrettably has been hitting Israeli towns and caused damage also to civilians. However, at the same time, those shells are being aimed at the same areas that those Palestinian refugees came from. Now, the relations between Israel and Gaza has developed in a very, very peculiar manner. In 1948, of course, the Egyptian army lost and then redeployed into the Gaza Strip, which it managed for 19 years, up to 1967. And then the Israeli army came forward, the Israeli tanks occupied Gaza. And of course, as the rest of the West Bank, the people of Gaza did not become citizens of Israel. They did not become residents of Israel. They became subjects of Israeli military rule. However, this, of course, does not change the dynamics between people. Over half of the Palestinian young males worked in Israel. The people you see today being killed in Gaza, the older one of them, they speak Hebrew. They have been building their houses in Jaffa, they've been building their houses in Tel Aviv, they've been building their houses in Haifa. Between Gaza City, which is somewhere here, and Tel Aviv, there has been a train line working in the 1970s, shuffling people to work in construction. So, of course, people have been meeting each other. Until today, you have all the Israelis who are remembering their friends who are today in Gaza being locked up under siege. So the relations between people have been also very complex at the same time that the political situation became what it is today. Now, trouble started trouble for the Israeli occupation started in 1987 with the first Intifada, in which Palestinians came up to the streets, mostly non-violently, demanding their rights, demanding an end for the Israeli occupation, and demanding the three fundamental rights, which Ronnie had previously mentioned. In the beginning of the 1990s, at the same time with the Oslo Accords, at the same time that Israel was negotiating peace agreements, right, with the Palestinian leadership, or at least doing so in front of the international audience, at the same time Israel has vastly increased its settlements in the Gaza Strip. It took more and more land inside the Gaza Strip, and has well banned most Palestinians from accessing the Israeli labor market. So now the Palestinians of Gaza could not access the labor market in Israel, could not be breadwinners anymore in what is today Israel or 1948 territories. And at the same time, they could no longer travel freely to the West Bank or to Jerusalem, to the holy sites, to visit their families or their friends. And then, of course, now you have this distinction between Gaza Strip and the West Bank. This, of course, came heads-on, especially since the early 2000s, with the start of the Second Intifada, and ever so more since the victory of the Hamas political faction in the 2005 general elections. Now, of course, we're talking about elections, democratic elections, that the Israeli government has not only allowed, but encouraged. That is, Israel guaranteed to respect the choice of the Palestinians in regards to their democratic vote. However, Israel has not done so. Instead, immediately after the 2005 vote, Israel began implementing a series of restrictive measures on the Gaza Strip that have led, and especially so after 2007, to a complete siege of the entire territory. Nothing goes in and nothing goes out, nobody goes in and nobody goes out without Israeli approval. As a matter of fact, in 2009, Israel has developed a specific system measuring the amount of calories that Palestinians in Gaza Strip are allowed to have per day, and have provided that is exported to the Gaza Strip for money, we're talking about, have exported limited amounts of food, supplies, limited amount of medicine based on research done by the Israeli civil administration unit of the Israeli army. Now, what does this tell us, of course? What am I trying to come to here? That when you hear about, in the media here, about the difference between Israel and Gaza, the Israel-Gaza conflict, and all those images are portrayed between two different sides, this is hardly the case. As a matter of fact, Gaza under international law is still a military-occupied territory. That is because Israel controls all the entries and all the exits. Israel controls all the foods that comes in and out, all the products that come in and out. They also control, and this is not very known, I think, in Europe, they also control they register all the births and deaths of Palestinians. If a Palestinian baby is being born in Gaza City, he has to be registered in the Israeli civil registry. Of course, not as a citizen, as a military subject, but he has to be registered in that Israeli civil registry in order to later be able to get a Palestinian passport, which is also issued with Israeli approval. Palestinians in Gaza also have to ask for Israeli approval. For example, if they want to renovate or rebuild the house, they need to apply for Israeli approval to get building material into the Gaza Strip. And when the Palestinians want to build something simple, like a cellular network, for example, in the Gaza Strip, they need to ask, of course, Israeli approval to use those bandwidths up in the air. There is no Palestinian sovereignty in Gaza, not over land, not over airspace, and not over sea. And of course, you've all seen the images coming in 2011 of the aid ships coming to Gaza and being attacked. So what I'm trying to say is that Palestinians in Gaza, despite all the entire inaccurate display of relations that you have in the media, are still to some degree Israeli subjects. And when I say that they're Israeli subjects, I mean that when Israel is attacking in Gaza, it's attacking a part of its own polity. It's attacking a part of its own, what should be its own citizenry, as they're still the sovereign power in the Gaza Strip. Now, the type of rule or the type of violent implementation of that rule in Gaza has changed vastly throughout the 10 years. And I think those of you from Gaza, which I've seen here previously, might remember the Israeli assassination of Palestinian political militant Shahada in 2002. It was the first case of a large-scale Israeli assassination using airplanes, using F-16s in the Gaza Strip. And that caused a very strong response from the international community, because while Israel assassinated this Palestinian militant, they killed 12 other citizens. They killed 12 other civilians, including Shahada's family and his neighbors. Now, already back then, you had people accusing the Israeli commanders who issued the order and the Israeli politicians of war crimes. But what we had today, and I'm talking about the last war, I think it should be somewhere here. But what we had in the last war has been completely different. So when Israel attacked in July 2014, just a few months ago, they took the different tactic of attacking full family houses, full whole buildings, demolishing them up to rubbles, and killing everybody who is inside. So each one of those nice infographics represent one family who has been killed in their own home as they've been waiting out the Israeli attacks. And you had, I think, just an example, 26 killed in one house or 10 killed in one house. So to a certain degree, the Israeli acceptance, or the Israeli public and international public acceptance of the escalation of the Israeli policies has been very wide in the last 10 years. So what we have not been seeing before, we see now, and it's to a large degree getting worse. Now, of course, there is no, as much as this is very difficult, of course, there is no reason to believe this cannot be changed. And I think that a part of what we want to see in Gaza, right, is not as a separate unit that we have to deal with. There is no Gaza problem. There is one issue, and that is Israel-Palestine. And this one issue requires attendance to. And when we talk about attending to, we talk about solving the problem from its root cause, which is, as Ronnie mentioned, of course, the need to bring peace and equality for everybody who's in the land. And, of course, that same thing brings me to Jerusalem, because, just a short introduction. So my research deals with the Israeli security provision, or the privatization of Israeli security provision in East Jerusalem. Now, East Jerusalem, as Ronnie mentioned as well, is a very interesting case. And why is that? Because East Jerusalem, on one hand, is being portrayed by the Israeli media and by the Israeli government as a unified city, as if there is such a place called Jerusalem, which is one city where people live. And of course, there is some trouble, but it still is, you know, a united city under Israeli rule. While, of course, in reality, the situation is very different. After Israel occupied East Jerusalem in 1967, they have annexed first to Jerusalem municipality and later to Israeli territory a large piece of land, to be exact, 23 villages in and around Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, which are now considered a part of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is a kind of a conglomerate of villages and refugee camps and national parks and tiny hamlets in Jerusalem East and in Jerusalem West, which have very little to do with each other before the Israeli authorities have placed the same rule on each one of those territories. And of course, in some cases, it's very, very confusing, because you have one house in one camp, which is considered under Israeli territory according to Israeli law. And you have another house across the street. And that house is considered already to be in the West Bank, right? And that is very, very confusing, of course, both for the people who live there, as well as, of course, to the people who are researching this topic. Now, what is happening in Jerusalem since 1967? In large degree, the same story represents everything which is happening in the West Bank. So settlements, the Israeli government, under Israeli decrees, unilaterally expropriates large amounts of land, which it then gives to Jewish-only settlements throughout East Jerusalem. The second thing which is happening is, of course, segregation between the communities and discrimination between provision. So even when you have a population which, according to Israeli law, right, according to Israeli law, are legal residents of Israel, right? They're not citizens. They don't have an Israeli passport. They have a laissez-passer. They're Israeli residents, but they still do not enjoy nearly the same services, not of an Israeli Jew, nor of an Israeli Jewish settler. Now, The third phenomenon which I want to talk about is that the recent phenomenon of Israeli settlements inside Palestinian neighborhoods in Jerusalem. So here you have this Palestinian neighborhood, Silwan. It's just outside the old city, and it has a wonderful view looking towards the Temple Mount. And Israeli semi-governmental organizations for the past 7-8 years have been orchestrating a campaign aimed at taking over houses within Palestinian neighborhoods to form outposts and compounds which are for Jewish-only population inside the neighborhoods as a way to displace the local population and replace it with Jewish-only settlers. Now, you have this house here, it has an Israeli flag. And of course, what comes to mind is what kind of neighborhood relationships are there between those neighbors, right? The Palestinians who are occupied and the Israeli settler who come armed together with special security provision paid for by the Israeli state. The answer is there is none. There is or very, very little relations between them. They are not only segregated despite living in the same neighborhood, they are also in a situation where the mere presence of the Israeli settlers has started to displace the people around them and make their lives into a living hell, similar as the situation is in the city of Hebron in the southwest bank. Needless to say, all the Israeli actions in East Jerusalem, settlement, the construction of the wall, the expropriation of territory, the demolition of houses, there has been over 15,000 demolished homes in East Jerusalem and the West Bank since 1967. So all those actions are illegal according to international law. And I want to show you something that really, really bothered me. Ronnie was talking about the International Court of Justice in Den Haag, which has ruled in 2004 that the Israeli actions in the West Bank are illegal under international law, as well as forbid any third party, such as the Netherlands, to lend a hand in the perpetuation of those same policies. So last year, there has been the Israeli president, or former president, Shimon Peres, and I went online and I saw a photo of his. And it was President Peres is visiting the International Court of Justice in The Hague. And at first I was really happy because it always in the protests in Israel, there is a recurrent theme of saying, Peres, we will meet you in The Hague, right? We expect you in The Hague. And then he was there and he shook the hands of all the distinguished judges of the International Court of Justice. At the same time that he was orchestrating those same policies those judges have deemed war crime under the Fourth Geneva Convention. Okay. Fourth thing I want to talk to you about is the future. I have 5 minutes, so I will finish that. The future of the Israeli society, that is, because as much as Ronnie, I'm also a part of the Israeli society. And I grew up there, and I follow the Israeli news, and my friends are Israeli, and we always, we agree or we have fights, and there is a lot of discussion going on. But I want to share with you also that I'm quite scared. And the reason that I want to tell you that I'm scared is because what we have seen in the last years is, in my opinion, a complete deterioration of the Israeli society into explicit racism and hatred towards anything which is Palestinian or Arab. Now, when I was showing you before the photo or the infographic of the Palestinian families killed in Gaza, you should understand that this is not a topic of discussion in Israel. It's probably more topic of discussion here in the Netherlands than it is in Israel. Doing the war surveys found that about 96% of the Israeli public either supported the Israeli attacks on Gaza or would argue that those attacks have to be more severe and more costly to Palestinian lives. Right? So 96%. This is what we deal with. And then my friends here in the Netherlands, they ask me, so what do Israelis want? Right? I mean, how could you live in this situation year in, year out, to have a war every second day? And it's very interesting because in the Israeli political sphere, the discussion about Gaza, for example, is very much that of not trying to find a solution. In fact, the Israeli military commander who commanded the attack in 2009 on Gaza said, attacking Gaza is like mowing the grass. You go there, you cut them down, and a few years later you go back. And this is what's really scary about the grass metaphor. Not that humans are compared to grass, right, to wild grass growing on the land. What's really scary is the idea that this becomes a routine, that this becomes a part of the Israeli system of governance, which requires, in the eyes of the Israeli administration, requires maintenance which involve the mass killing of Palestinians. Now, so what do Israelis want? Do they want peace? Yes. I think so. I would say so. I hope so. But are Israelis currently seeking peace? Are they willing? They know what peace entails. They know it entails equality. They know it entails a redistribution of resources. They know it entails changing the Israeli state and society from within. Are they currently willing to do so? I'm not so sure. And I'm really afraid not. Because the current Israeli government has been having one consistent policy. And that policy is preserving the status quo. And the status quo entails military occupation in the West Bank, occupation in Gaza and recurrent attacks, and discrimination within Israel proper. What can be done to change it? Well, Ronnie has been already giving some hints. And I think that Israelis will understand, once they understand that the status quo is no longer sustainable, that either the international community and the Palestinians will no longer agree to upkeep that same status quo, deadly status quo, then some things will change. And there will have to be a change because, of course, at one point or another, there will be equality and there will be peace and there will be justice in Palestine and Israel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ronnie and Lior, for your excellent introductions and sticking also exactly to the time so that we have about 45 minutes for discussion. Unless you don't have any questions or remarks, and then we stop earlier, but I don't think so. So we will stop at 9:45, so that if people want to leave, please, if you do not necessarily have to leave, wait till 9:45, then we will stop. So you can bet on that. Secondly, rules for the discussion. Please keep your questions brief. I don't want to hear long statements of what you think about everything that's happening in the area, but I want to hear questions, perhaps brief opinions, and then followed by a question, but not long statements. Third rule of the game, use the microphone, because it is being recorded, also in view of what will happen next week, so that also people speaking there can already have a bit of a feeling of what is being discussed here, so we have even more fruitful meeting next week. We'll take, what do you would like to do? Shall we take a couple of questions each time and then respond to that, or one by one?
I suggest a couple of questions.
A couple of questions. So let's see who would like to raise a point. 1, 2, 3. I'll start here in the middle. We start here we make it diagonal.
Hi.
Please state your name and, yeah.
Hello, Bertjan Bakker. I would like to ask, and any of you can answer that probably. The general public in Israel, are they aware of the history of the State of Israel, the way you describe it? And, okay, that's just this question.
Could you hand it over to the lady in red?
I would like...
Oh, no, behind you.
Ik ben Tsafi, ook van Israël, maar heel lang in Nederland. Wat ik in jullie...
Could you phrase your question in English, please?
I'm Tsafi from Israel, also very long in Groningen. What I miss, and that's my question because I have to keep it short, why have you so or no empathy no any understanding of the fear which is in the kern, source of Israeli politics. How much fear fits the situation. I miss very much your empathy with our side. It's not bad guys and good guys, but I have to keep it short. So.
And then was the third one behind you. Behind you.
I'll take a second.
And then we'll go to the first.
Good evening. My name is Guy. My question is short. What's your solution for the return of the refugees from the 48 borders? Thank you.
I think that was already quite a bit for a start.
You take first, I take second, take third.
Okay, so we arrange it between us. So I will answer the first, gentleman. You asked whether Israeli society is aware of what I discussed before, the history of the situation. I would argue that Israeli society is living a constant lie. The whole Israeli identity is one big lie. Because the establishment of the State of Israel, it's not just a colonialist project that came over to take over as much land, as much resources, also to use and abuse the people there and so on. But it's also inherently about denying the rights of those indigenous people of the land. So inherent to the existence of the State of Israel, inherent to the existence of Israelis in Israel, is the denying of Palestinians. And one of the first things that happened after the ethnic cleansing is also an orchestrated act of erasing Palestinian culture as much as possible, because also Palestinian culture is a threat to Israeli society, and also every single Palestinian who is being born in today's Israel is being regarded as a security threat by the state, or as a problem at the very least. I can elaborate, but we will keep that for later. That was my short answer to you.
There's no discussion about this history.
No, there is no, yes. The question was, but there is no discussion about that among Israelis. Those who acknowledge the fact of the ethnic cleansing would either acknowledge it and say that is okay, but for the greater good, at least for the good of Israelis, that is acceptable. That is acceptable because having a Jewish majority is more important. Or they will come up with other excuses. But those who do acknowledge it, they will justify it because if not, we will not have a Jewish majority. If not, there will be another Holocaust. All kinds of other reasonings to justify the unjustifiable.
So for the question of the lady regarding Israeli fears and empathy. Well, of course, first of all, I think both myself and Ronnie have a lot of empathy for Israeli society. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons that I will strive for equality, freedom, and justice in Israel-Palestine is because I care about the society in which I grew up. Because I want Israel and Palestine, that is Tel Aviv and a Palestinian village only 30 kilometers away from Tel Aviv, to be places worth living in. And I think that there is a future for us, but this future requires justice and equality. As about the fear, of course, many Israelis live in fear. As a matter of fact, some describe it as some sort of siege mentality, the idea that you are constantly under siege. Even in the Jewish Passover holiday, you sit down with your families and friends in Passover Eve, and you read the stories from a biblical text. And that says how in each and every generation somebody has been trying to hurt the Jewish people and so on. But let's be honest here for a bit. Let's not try to go out of point. Israel has the strongest army in the Middle East. The Palestinians do not. Israel has the support of each and every Western country. Militarily, financially, the Palestinians do not. Israel is able to maintain the control of occupation for over 40 years. The Palestinians do not occupy Israel. So, of course, we can understand Israeli fear. We come from Israeli society. But at the same time, I'm completely and utterly convinced that the solution for the problem in Israel-Palestine entails a complete and radical change in the relations between both sides, one that will no longer allow for one group to be supremacist and to occupy another group. And of course, no fear whatsoever can justify that.
I was asked about what about the refugees of 48? How do we bring about a solution? First of all, before Zionism, there was no conflict among Jews and Arabs, or meaning Muslims, Christians, and so on. They were living quite well together in Palestine. Also in other places, by the way. Jews fled from European countries to Arab countries, and they lived quite a good life there, until Zionism. With Zionism started this conflict, which they try to tell us that it is a religious conflict, but it has absolutely nothing to do with religion. It has everything to do with those who are supremacists, ethnic supremacists, who came over, took over, and not only, as I mentioned, not only took over, but also inherently deny the rights of the indigenous people. And what needs to happen? They need to acknowledge the rights of the indigenous people. There is no way around it. And I was living in Jaffa for a year, and just near my house, there was the sewage lid, still says Palestine Company there, on the sewage lid, until they will find out about it and replace it. But there are, if you look, and I don't have to tell you because you come from there, if you look, you will see signs of Palestinians and Palestine everywhere. You just have to open your eyes. We are trained not to open our eyes. We are trained to look away whenever we see a Palestinian symbol that raises some questions about our identity there, or about our existence there. What Palestinians are saying, at least the ones that I was talking about, and I'm active also in another capacity, I'm active also in a one-state group. We discuss the possibility of a one-state and so on. What Palestinians are coming and saying is actually, we, the oppressed, are willing to live alongside the oppressors, but as equals, nothing less than that. And I believe that this is a very generous offer.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sure there are more questions. Let's take some questions this side of the room. I see here a lady with a red cap, and then someone way back end.
Hi, I'm Gili from Israel. And first question I want to ask you, if you said that 96% of the population in Israel are holding in a different kind of opinion, how come you bring 2 from 4% to represent Israel? How does it make me feel sitting like this, holding such a different opinion and thinking about, okay, they have their opinion, representing Israel, well, I don't think it's represented at all. And yes, I have more questions for you. You were talking about 1948, right? So you were saying that we took these lands or something like this. You can open Wikipedia and see that there was a war, and they started a war, and okay, we won. I guess that this is ours now. This is how things going when you start a war, and one more thing that I want to...
Final question for you.
What?
Final point for you.
Okay, I have a lot. I have huge papers, like writing down. And why... Okay, last question. Why didn't you mention the bombs? Okay, Tzuk Eitan, I don't remember the name in English. It was like July, August. They were throwing bombs at us while we give them food. Yes, they made the bombs out of the food we gave them. So what do you say? What do you have to say about this?
I'm quite sure there will be an answer to that. The guy with the red cap. The guy with the red cap. With the red cap.
Hello, my name's Christian, and I'm afraid I can't give as much infuriating speech, but I was just curious as to why the media would distort the truth so much. No, not, you know, just looking at your view on it, or the lady's view or her view, but just because you obviously get to know what happens to people in Palestine, and that, you know, Israel has a lot of weapons, Palestinians are very poor, and why the media does actually show a very, you know, unrealistic side of it, why that happens.
That's always a good question, the role of the media. And then there's the guy in the
It's
grey...
enough for, it's okay for now.
The grey hair and a grey shirt, yeah. Grey hair first.
We are both grey.
Yeah.
I agree very much what the lecturers said, what the people, what you two said. I think, I don't understand why is that not coming on the table international, and why do not the Palestinian Authority saying such clear statements?
Very clear question. Can we take one more?
No
more. No more. That's enough.
I'll do the first and the last. You can wait or as you wish. Okay. Also you can. Okay.
First your question.
Back. Okay. Back online. First for the lovely lady from Israel.
Okay.
The idea. The issue of representation, first of all, very shortly, we're not here to represent Israel. I think that's kind of obvious, right? This is critical voices from Israel. Okay, thank you. And very honestly, if you want to hear, you know, representation of Israel, the Israeli ambassador is all the time in the media. You can just read what he says, okay? For one time in a change, in Groningen, you can get something else. First thing. Second thing, in regards to 1948 and the missiles from Gaza, very, very shortly. Yes, there has been a war, but let me tell you, ethnic cleansing, even doing war, is not acceptable. You do not do that. And if you do that, the United Nations have later declared that those people are allowed to return to their homes. You are not allowed to go into somebody's home in a time of war and deliberately remove them from the territory where they and their families live for generations, while you yourself are only a settler who came recently armed by foreign arms and foreign support. No, those are not the way things are going. True, there has been a war. True, there has been conflict. We're not here to discuss the entire history of that conflict. But people that have been expelled from their homes have the right to return the same way the people who are now expelled from Syria can return later to their homes when the situation gets better. That's the way things go. No need to... The clapping takes time. And quickly in regards to the issue of rockets from Gaza. Yes, of course, we all know about the rockets from Gaza. There has been, unfortunately, 6 Israeli citizens who died in the recent attack, during the Israeli recent attack on Gaza. This pales in comparison to the 2,000 Palestinians and over 500 Palestinian children who have been killed in their homes by the Israeli military. No, we're not going to try and beautify it. We're not trying to make it better. If you expect people who live in siege for over a decade and under occupation for over almost 50 years in cramped refugee camps and are given no hope and no future to sit down idly, I don't condone those attacks. Those are desperate acts of desperate militants. But to try and make any sort of balance between those sides, that's not going to work. I'm sorry. No, third one. Sorry.
So I will carry on from what Lior said. The situation is so unbalanced. And in the media, in the mainstream media, we hear about a conflict, a war. There is no conflict. There is no war. There is clearly the side of the oppressor and the side of the oppressed. The side of the apartheid people and those who are subjugated under apartheid. Those who are terrorizing and those who are being terrorized. And those who are terrorizing are not the Palestinians. Yes, there is also Palestinian terror. I agree with that. There is also Zionist terror, which is by far more deadly and more dangerous. The 4th largest nuclear superpower in the world, probably the fourth leading arms exporter in the world, and on and on. So why is mainstream media portraying this as if it is among equals? This question obviously has to be answered by mainstream media. Luckily, we also have alternatives, and we have to support these alternatives. And they are few, just like Israeli Voices, as was mentioned. Israeli Voices like Lior's and mine. First of all, we are few in numbers. We're actually a negligible few. And this is not in order to make something out of ourselves, just to know that there are very few critical voices that will discuss things in the way we just did. And on the other hand, there is a whole lot of discussion from the other side. And this is what we usually hear. So yes, we have to give a voice to these critical voices. Actually, the people we should be listening to are not Lior and myself. We should be listening to the Palestinians. These are the people we should be listening to. But since we are the privileged, we have to use our privilege. With privilege comes responsibility. So my responsibility is to speak up for those we should be fighting for and for their rights.
There was one more question from the
International?
The international situation and the role of the Palestinians, I think, or the way they spoke out.
Why the...
So clear.
I think it's something about the PA and the international...
Could you briefly repeat your question? And let's not try to make it in a contest of who has the better or the popular opinions. I think it's very valuable that there are also room enough for people who are critical about you. So and people are intimidated if we constantly applaud for something we like and what we don't like. Of course, you have the right to applaud, but I want to encourage those who are critical about the critical views also to give their voice and to questions.
You two give very clear statements of the situation. I agree very much with that. But why don't we hear that from the Palestinian authorities?
Okay, should I?
Okay.
I don't know.
I will be as diplomatic as I can about the Palestinian Authority. Mahmoud Abbas, from the so-called Palestinian so-called authority, that lost its mandate a long time ago, stated more than once that he is willing to renounce the right of return if the Israelis will offer a deal that is acceptable to him. Unfortunately for Mahmoud Abbas, he can only renounce his own right to return to Safed, where he came from. But he cannot speak on behalf of any other Palestinian who has this individual right to go back home. We also heard recently, and this is a very important issue about the Palestinian Authority, with the question of whether they are going to seek international jurisdiction in the International Criminal Court. This is extremely important because they have to take action in order for this to be discussed legally at the ICC. We heard recently from a PA representative in Geneva saying that going to the ICC would be a divorce from Israel. So I would urge them to seriously reconsider their position and to seek international jurisdiction.
And just a short comment. If you want to hear more critical voices from Palestine, also about the Palestinian Authority, you should also come next week.
Okay, yeah? We go to the gentleman who just did not give the chance, and then we go more to the middle of the center part of the room, where there probably are some questions as well. Who have questions in the middle? Back, at the back side? No, at the back? No, nobody? Okay, then we go to the other side, yeah. You're first.
Yeah. It has been mentioned that the issue is not about religion, but most of us know that in the Torah has been told that Israel is the home or the nation of Jewish people. So is that enough? Is that could be the reason to call Palestine now the national home of Jewish? And if it's like that, do you think that what James Arthur before that when he gave the declaration to I forgot the name, just have to look it up. When he gave it to Leonard Walter, and in this declaration he states that Britain will support the Jewish community to establish a national home in Palestine.
Clear question. Yeah. Okay, then we go to the gentleman in the green shirt there.
Hello, hi. Just to be responsive to this, what the young lady from Israel said, that you are not representative as two guys fighting for human rights. Maybe the voice of the president of Israel, who said like 2 weeks ago during the conference that Israel is sick, that's quotation, Israel is sick from racism, Israel needs treatment. And I do agree with this because when we watch pictures, for example, taken during the last attacks which take place in Gaza when young Israeli guys were gathering on the hills, taking selfies, bringing furniture, drinking beer, having parties, and watching how people suffer is sick. That's my opinion. But just to ask you a different question, I will ask this question to the first speaker. You started with nationality issues. And here, I mean, these days in Israel, there is also very important event that takes place is the introduction of the new bill by Benjamin Netanyahu, the bill called National State Bill. Basically, Netanyahu wanted to introduce the bill 2 weeks ago in Knesset. He said that Israel provides too many individual rights instead of more collective rights for the Jewish state. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think maybe we will touch on, both of us will touch on the two questions, okay? First, to the gentleman asking about about the Jewishness of the state or the religious aspect. We didn't have time to go into everything, so I will say it very clearly. Israel is not only not a Jewish state, it is an anti-Jewish state. Zionism is a movement, a secular movement, that was going against the ultra-Orthodox Jews of Europe, discussing about them in the most racist way. And actually, by the way, one of Herzl's ideas in order to resolve the issue that he saw of the Jewish people was basically for all of them to convert to Christianity. So this is clearly not about religion. I don't have time to go into all of it, but there is a lot to be said. We have to remember that Zionism only took hold among secular Jews, and also only about 5% of all world Jewry. None of the religious ultra-Orthodox supported it. They were all staunch anti-Zionists until roughly World War II. But still, there was, and still is, a very strong opposition to Zionism, also inside 48, inside what is regarded as the State of Israel. And what you see here is a very recent example. I didn't write the date there, but there was a recent attack on a synagogue, an ultra-Orthodox synagogue in Jerusalem, by Palestinians who murdered a terror attack on a synagogue. There were previous such posters called Pashkvil in the ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods in Jerusalem. We usually don't hear about these things because it doesn't reach the media. And they warned ahead of time that there will be bloodshed because of what is written here, because so-called religious people, Zionists who are dressed up in a religious form, insisted to go to Temple Mount, Haram Sharif, and to agitate and to instigate and so on. And they were warning that there will be bloodshed, and indeed there was bloodshed. So when there was the attack, the terror attack on the synagogue, actually they were blaming the Zionists. I don't want to take away the responsibility of those assailants, those who were murdering people, but those people in the ultra-Orthodox community from Mea Shearim, and this represents the vast majority of the ultra-Orthodox people there, this is what they had to say, and I think it is translated so you can, I think this is a good representation. Another thing I would refer to Yaakov Israel Dahan, who is a Dutch-born, who arrived in Jerusalem in 1924. He was assassinated by the Zionists. I do not have time to go into it now. We can talk about it later. This was the first political assassination, political murder in Palestine, which basically the Zionist leadership decided to assassinate this ultra-Orthodox Dutch guy because he managed to secure free access to Jews to Palestine without the nationalistic aspect. And this was too much of a threat to the Zionists, so they decided to assassinate him. Israel is not a Jewish state by religion, it is only Jewish by supremacy.
Okay, I will just touch upon the other question regarding the sick Israeli society. I don't like to think about the Israeli society as sick, despite what the Israeli president said. And I think this is also not the direction that necessarily we want to think in. The reason for that is that despite having been in Israel in the last summer, so doing the Israeli attack in Gaza, and despite seeing very militant, right-wing, semi-fascist Israeli beating up Palestinians and leftists in the streets, and despite seeing people celebrating Palestinian deaths, those are all very bad. And also the people that you see who are cheering as Israel is bombing houses in Gaza, that's also very bad indeed. But still, the people who committed the crimes are the people who decided to bomb those houses. These are the sick people. Those are the people that don't need treatment, they need to be indicted in the international court. So yes, we can talk about the Israeli society, but let's be honest. There are always groups or outliers of very, very explicit racist people among each and every nation. So what? The question is how much racist or how much violent are the rest of them? So I will not go look straight at those people. I will first and foremost go to the Israeli leaders and look at what they do. You wanted to?
Yeah, I would like to add something. We are not here, we are not in agreement here.
Yeah.
We are, I appreciate your views, of course.
Yeah.
I think that Zionism is a form of mental sickness. Supremacy is a form of mental sickness. And I'm not willing to give it an ounce of legitimacy. Now, it is true that most Israelis are not fanatic, they are not crazy, they are just apathetic. They don't know and they don't want to know. And this is happening all over the world, not only in Israel. And this is a big problem that we have to tackle. But at the same time, I'm not willing to give an ounce of legitimacy to Zionism in all forms. I'm not willing to give legitimacy to supremacy. And the only thing that will be legitimate, the only thing that will transform the situation is to insist on basically treating also the society by insisting on equality and insisting on the rights of everyone, not only on the rights of the Jews.
But if I may then ask a question, if you call Zionism sick, or
Absolutely.
you say that is supremacy, how do you overcome that? Because there are people who are Zionists, or they call themselves Zionists. And you can say, I don't accept that. In my definition, that is something which we should not want, but it is there. So what can we do about that? How do you change then that mind of people, the mindset of people?
No supremacist, oppressive society that I know of in the past stopped its business just because all of a sudden people woke up one day and said, apartheid is not good, let's end it. We don't like it anymore. The situation changed and they were forced into change. And this will also happen in Palestine. So, frankly, I couldn't care less what the apartheid people think about apartheid. What matters is how do we end it. And we do have a way to end it. Finally, after many, many years of trying, we have a concentrated effort, a global effort, to apply pressure on Israel by non-violent means of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And boycott is not only financial boycott, it's not only the economic boycott. There's also cultural boycott and academic. If you don't know, every single Israeli academy, every single Israeli university is complicit in many crimes. You have 2 universities that have a military base on campus. You have the Dahlia doctrine that Lior mentioned, the bombing of a terrorist with bombing of a terrorist or whatever you want to call it with an F-16 bomb that kills 12 innocent people in the same time. That was actually perfected. That was this whole doctrine was worked on by the Tel Aviv University, their legal department. There's so many different examples. Research funding is being given, they receive funds from the Ministry of Defense. You have every single university is participating in different bids in order to supply services to the army, and on and on and on. The list is so long. Every university is complicit in crime. So, as academics, I urge you, at the very least, to discuss whether Israel should be boycotted academically. That does not infringe on academic freedom. We are not boycotting individuals. We are not boycotting individual academics. We are boycotting the institutions. We are calling on the severance of ties between this academic institution here and the academic institutions, the criminal academic institutions in Israel. And if you support the boycott campaign against apartheid South Africa at the time, you should definitely support the Palestinian call, which is much more responsible. We have clear guidelines about what do we boycott, what do we not boycott. We do not boycott the individuals. We boycott the institutions.
Okay. Are there any other questions related to this topic of boycott and campaigns? There's one and there's one. Yeah. There's another one. Yeah. Oh, here and there. And maybe there in the middle. Yeah. That one and there.
How important is the boycott of cultural events? I was one of the 10 activists who boycotted, who disturbed the performance of Lior Koenig in Amsterdam 1.5 months ago. How is that perceived in...
Could you explain who Lior Koenig is?
Sorry? Yeah, she's the first lady of Israeli theater. And actually I have the clear feeling that we were removed from the theater by Israel's Secret Service, actually. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that as well. And if people want to join the next one, then come to me after this one.
We have a question over here in the middle.
Hi, my name is Dionisio. I just want to, pull it more on the international side, but more on the negotiations. I think what's been missing from this conversation, I believe, is the idea that we seem to be focusing on Israel as a solution, but I don't think it's necessarily that. I think Israel has put itself in a position where it's so far advanced into its oppression of the Palestinians that it fears, should it give peace to the Palestinians? There are two sides to the story now. I mean, you have Iran and the Arab League that Israel could be fearful that should it have free Palestine, there will be a lot of Arab influence right on its borders. Now, obviously, they've already gone too far. You can't just decide all of a sudden. I'm not saying that it's beneficial for them, but I think it's gone to a point where the suffering is so much that you begin, if you oppress somebody for so long, you begin to you begin to wonder what happens when they let them free. And when they are free, the people they associate with, the people who are supporting them, are not your friend, you would begin to think twice. What do you think of that?
Would you like to respond?
I think
Okay. So about cultural boycott, extremely, extremely important as far as I'm concerned. The financial boycott is usually against companies that are clearly in violation of international law and oppression of Palestinians, and this would usually be because we usually focus on these companies that are active in the occupied territories. Companies like SodaStream that are actually located in a settlement, or companies like Veolia and others that are actually facilitating the oppression in one way or another. But the cultural and academic boycott actually touch on the very essence of the State of Israel, because what we are saying, and I mentioned that we have clear guidelines, we will not boycott any Israeli artist that comes to play in Groningen simply because they are from Israel. That does not fall under the definition of the boycott. But we will boycott those that come as they are referred to as cultural ambassadors of the Israeli state. The moment that they receive funding from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or other such funds that are clearly for the sake of propaganda, or, for example, participate in festivals, and these festivals are organized for the sake of propaganda, and you have many of those as well, then these events should be boycotted because of that, because they use their art, they use and abuse their art for the sake of propaganda, for the sake of whitewashing Israeli crimes and showing another face, a nicer face of Israel in order to divert the attention. Every such actions, every such international artist that refuses to perform in Israel, and many of them do, and every such Israeli artist that is concerned about performing here as a cultural ambassador, that has a lot of repercussion inside Israel. We hear about it all the time. Every international artist that is signed to play in Israel, we see in the Israeli media, usually in Hebrew, immediately they start questioning, will they really come, will they not cancel at the last minute, and so on. But it's not only about the cancellation, which is mostly concerning the fans and the producer, but it's the whole mentality that says, okay, we are becoming a pariah state. The whole state is becoming a pariah state because the whole state should be treated as such. So this has, I think, a very strong social effect, psychological effect.
Yeah, I will quickly address the question regarding fear and the way that Israelis are treating the area, the region that they live in. Of course, you should understand that when you live in Israel, it is very much the case that you live in the Middle East, right? You live in that small piece of land. But you could have as much lived in outer space. You have no relation with the region, almost at all, whatsoever. It's amazing that the fact that most Israelis, almost the vast majority of Israeli Jews, have never left Israel overland. There's the airport. You fly from there. That's your only bridge to the outer world. So, of course, you have fear from the unknown as much as you have from the fear that is being propagated to you by the media. But still, let's be clear. And let's take the case of South Africa for that purpose. The white people, the white supremacists of South Africa during the apartheid era had an inherent fear of what will happen the day that they will end the supremacist regime. Of course they had the fear of that. So what? Do you think the Israelis don't have that fear? They do. Does that mean that there is no solution? Every Palestinian leader that comes up and make an offer, including the Arab League offer, the Arab initiative to make a comprehensive peace treaty with Israel, has been either rejected or ignored by Israeli leaders. Even the ones that promise, right, international guarantees for the safety of Israeli Jews. And let's take it even a step further. As much as Israel is imprisoning as political prisoners Palestinian militants, they imprison much more Palestinian non-violent activists who are protesting for their rights. They fear much more Palestinians who are taking non-violent stand to bring together people from their community to fight against injustice than they fear those who are throwing stones, for example. So are Israelis fearful? Yes. But is that fear justified? No. Is that fear an excuse? Still not. And to be honest, I still think that in the long run, if the choice of the Israeli society will be between international acceptance and overcoming that fear, they will choose international acceptance. And this is why that we believe that there is a way to go forward with external pressure. Because you want to be internationally accepted more than you have this inherent fear in you. My take on it.
Thank you. I think in view of the time, Ronnie, would you like to say a few words as a last call for action or whatever you would like to do? You have 1 minute for that. Give you the podium here.
Yeah, I need much more than 1 minute, but it's true, we heard about fear, and there is the Israeli side, and we have to, I'm talking about the Zionist Israeli side, and we have to listen to that. But at the same time, we have to listen to what Lior just said a moment ago. In order to transform the situation, what matters is the values that we hold dear. It's not whether one person or another is afraid to lose their privilege. Yes, people are afraid to lose their privilege, but they will have to overcome it. They don't want to change. Change is difficult for all of us, but we have to force them into change because we have to demand these values that we regard as the most elementary, the most basic values. And in order to do that, we have a way. Finally, we have a way, so I'm finally optimistic about the situation. So actually, I come here with good news. Things are changing. Things are changing rapidly. We haven't had time to discuss everything. There is now, for example, this recognition of a Palestinian state among European countries. I have much to say about that. We haven't had time to discuss it, but the good thing about it is that there is a shift in public opinion, even among the countries, among the politicians. They are not there yet. They still need time. We have to help them. But there is a change happening, and I just urge you to join us to bring about that change. Thank you.
I'm sorry that we didn't have more time to answer all your questions or remarks. I think it was a very fruitful evening where we heard two persons speaking out from their conscience, from their hearts, about what they think should be done. I hope, at least, what you say is that you you have hopes, some optimism, and there is hope. Walls come down sometimes, but you never can predict when. You have to work towards it, and you have to hope that it comes down. So we have here a present for the speakers today. It's a newly released book on the collapse, it's called The Accidental Opening of the Berlin Wall. Nobody could predict that the Berlin Wall would come down, but the fact that so many people believed in it, that it could be brought down, brought it down. And that took a long time, and in the Israel-Palestine situation in the Middle East, it takes even perhaps more time. Let's hope that the wall, literal and figuratively speaking, will come down. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
I hope that you will be
Thank
here
you very
next
much.
week for the other part.
Thank you very much.